So I've been giving some thought lately to how we can not only stay in touch with one another, because I think a lot of people are doing a reasonable job at that, but also ways that we can kind of dig into the situation we've been forced into. And one way that is come to mind, as you might expect would come to mind to me as the pastor, but also as me and my personality, is about reading. I've been thinking that maybe in the next couple weeks, as we kind of look at things and get ready for however long this might be, that I probably start up some kind of a reading group, recommend a book here or there, and then have some time where through Zoom we can have some kind of meeting together with people that are reading that book and want to discuss it. But in the meantime, I was thinking today about just some recommendations that I might give you for books that you might want to look up, whether through ebooks on the internet or to order them for yourself, something that you might find useful. And I picked out a few that I thought I would talk about today. The first one is something that you've probably heard me recommend at some time in the past, many of you, called Simply Christian by N.T. Wright. Wright is a really well-known New Testament scholar, specialist in Jesus and in Paul and his letters. But he's also written, in addition to his big scholarly books, written a lot of more accessible books for people in the church. And this one seems to me kind of one of the middle type of books between accessibility and also a fair bit of weight to it. It's not a long book, 230 something pages. It's intended for a pretty wide audience, including non-believers as well as Christians who are looking to understand their faith better, looking to think about ways to explain and to articulate our faith within the world that we live. It's broken up into 3 sections. The first section is called Echoes of a Voice, where he kind of identifies different features of life in this world that the Christian gospel accounts for in a really good way. Those things are desire for justice in a world that we know there's lots of injustice in. The fact that a lot of people sense that there's something deeper to this life that they might call spirituality or spiritual concerns. Another is our seeming to be made for relationships, both with each other and with God. And then finally, for the fact that we recognize that there is such a thing as beauty in the world. And so he kind of uses those as the entry point into then talking about, in the second section, which is called Staring at the Sun, talking about the heart of what is the Christian gospel. And that kind of works out to be almost like a summary of the Bible in about 100 pages or so. And it's really good. And if you have read the Bible and sometimes struggled to think, how do I hold all this together? Very helpful way that he puts it there. And then the third section, he goes over several Christian practices: worship, prayer, Bible reading, witness, church life, and the way we live into the hope that we have as Christians for what God is going to do in the new creation. It's a very, I think it's I'm not going to say it's not a deep and weighty book for a lot of people. It will feel like it's giving you a lot, but it's also really clearly written, as all of what Wright does tends to be, and so really worth taking a look at that. The second book is this little collection called John and Charles Wesley Selected Prayers, Hymns, and Sermons from the Harper Spiritual Classics series. The Wesleys were, as many of you will know, key figures in the evangelical movement in the 1700s in England, and had a large influence in America as well. Their name is where the Wesleyan Church gets its name, and the whole Methodist movement is something that's associated really closely with them. John Wesley was a preacher, very famous as a traveling speaker. Also his journal, in which he talks about his own kind of spiritual growth, even in the midst of his ministry, the sense that he had of a really close kind of experiential relationship with God that was being brought out more and more, and especially kind of crystallized in one part of his life, is something that is selected from in this as well. Also, he's got some recommendations on spiritual reading in here that did as a preface to a famous Christian classic called The Imitation of Christ. But it's here excerpted as just advice for all spiritual reading that we might undertake. And then Charles Wesley is known for his hymn writing. Some of our most famous hymns are hymns that were written by Charles Wesley. Christ the Lord is risen today, and Can It Be, and many, many others. And so there's a selection of them in there. For Christians, we have to, I think, realize that we have a great gift in 20 centuries worth of forefathers and mothers who've gone ahead of us and who have left behind this kind of treasure of their writings and their life with God, their reflection on the Bible, and so on. And though 250 years ago might seem like a long time to go back, it's really, in the long history of the church, it's fairly recent that the Wesleys are a part of that story. But I think it's worth, during maybe a time when you've got more lengthy spare moments to sit down, that this would be a good accessible way into somebody from the past of the Christian church. The final one I want to recommend is Flannery O'Connor, Spiritual Writings. This is from another series called Modern Spiritual Masters. O'Connor was a Catholic fiction writer. She wrote two novels and two collections of short stories in her lifetime. She did not live to be very old. She died in 1964 at 39 after having suffered with the disease lupus for many years. And her suffering marks her writing in a lot of ways. Her fiction is certainly touched by it, but especially her letters and her essays. And there's selections from all of those different kinds of her writing that are in this book. O'Connor's a real favorite of mine. My favorite book is her collected letters called The Habit of Being. She's somebody that, as you get to read more of her personal writing, my experience is that you get to really have a sense of getting to know her. Though she lived a quiet and reserved life, lived until she died with her mother, just the two of them, on a farm in Georgia, and raised peacocks famously. That was her favorite animals around the yard. She was really generous in different ways, the ways that she could, both in the things that she talked about in her writing and also the people that she kept in touch with through her writing. And this book gives you a good selection of that, and kind of a way that we can see the way that she learned what being a Christian meant for dealing with the suffering that she went through. Some of my most memorable things about her, as I think about her life, are those last couple of months, as she really believed that her fiction was a calling that God had given her, and that she needed to keep at it. And even when she was in the hospital, she kept her unfinished stories, the papers of them, under her pillow, and then for whatever spare time in the day that she could muster up enough energy, maybe an hour a day was all she was getting in at that last little while, she would work away at trying to finish these last stories that she really wanted to be able to leave for the world. And just a selection to read here, a brief paragraph from one of her letters to a friend, where she does reflect on her suffering, but really in a way that I think for us going through what we're going through right now, we can kind of hear this in the same vein we'd hear C.S. Lewis talking about pain being the megaphone of God, which I've seen people refer to recently on the internet as well. Here she writes, "I have never been anywhere but sick. In a sense, sickness is a place, more instructive than a long trip to Europe, and it's always a place where there's no company, where nobody can follow. Sickness before death is a very appropriate thing, and I think those who don't have it miss one of God's mercies." These three books, just a place to kind of start your mind thinking of what you might look up and avail yourself of and read. And I'd love to hear your feedback about them if you do pick up any of these. If you want to have discussions about them, we can definitely be doing that as well. There's lots of other places you could go and recommendations you could take. And as I said, maybe in the next little while we'll figure out some things to do together as a church family. But I thought I'd begin with just these recommendations and pass them on to you.